Endowment is led by Professor Chris Thornton, who is the Director of NEH's Division of Research Programs. Chris, it's an absolute pleasure and honour that you're giving up your time today to be with us. And before I hand over to you, let me tell everyone a little bit about you. Chris joined the NEH in 2018 from the National Geographic Society, where he served as acting head of the grants program, overseeing a 15 million grant program supporting science, education and storytelling. In his role, Chris actually oversaw the complete restructuring of National Geographic's grant strategy and process. Previously, Chris designed an organisational initiative to combat looting and site destruction at the National Geographic Society's Senior Director of Cultural Heritage, following 4 years as lead program officer of grants in the Earth and Social Sciences. Now, in addition to advising National Geographic on issues related to cultural heritage, Chris sat on the US Commission for UNESCO and is director of the World Heritage Site of Bat in the Sultanate of Oman. An expert in the origins of metallurgy and early complex societies in Iran and Arabia, Chris holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania, a Master of Philosophy in Archaeology from the University of Cambridge, and a Bachelor's in Archaeology and Archaeometry, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it, from Harvard University. Now, look, on top of all of these impressive achievements, he's also a thoroughly lovely person and a delight to engage in conversation. And welcome, Chris, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Nicole. What a great intro. I really appreciate it. And I should say formally, thank you, Nicole, for inviting me here today. And of course, to Jacob for all his work in organizing today's event. Thrilled to be here with all of you. Wish I could be there in person. But what the plan is for today, as Nicole said, is in this first part, I'm going to do a whirlwind tour through the National Endowment for the Humanities. We are a small but complex agency with a lot of different programs and different divisions. And what we like to do with this first section is simply give you an idea of the types of grants. So I'm not going to go over all 50 programs or whatever's available to you, but just go over the different divisions, different types of programs, and I'll do that very quickly. And as Nicole said, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to them after I do my spiel, which I'll try to be speedy in doing so. This afternoon after lunch, I'm going to talk more about sort of brass tacks. So what happens to your application once you submit it to the NEH? So the idea is to open up the black box, let you see how the NEH works from the inside. And part of that, as Nicole said, is we're going to have a mock panel. And what that means is 4 of your colleagues at ASU have graciously agreed to be panelists. I sent them 3 fellowship applications. They're actual fellowship applications. You may have received them as well, perhaps, but certainly they have, and they sent me scores and comments just like panelists would. And we're going to sit down virtually and have a review of those 3 applications in front of you. And the idea being to show you the kinds of discussions and the kinds of issues that arise when your application comes to the NEH. And I'll be explaining things as we go through that. So this morning is more about NEH programs, and this afternoon is more about the application process and just some tips for good grant writing that hopefully will be helpful. So with that, I'm going to do my best to share my screen, and let's see if we can make this work. Okay, hopefully you can all see the title slides. If you cannot, please put it in the chat, or Jacob, let me know if things go awry. So that is my contact. Feel free to use it. We are government employees. We work for you. So you should all feel free to reach out to us at any time. We won't respond immediately, but we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Oh, this is interesting. Here we go. All right. I like to start with the, let's start at the end. What are the conclusions? What is it that you need to know? Well, our programs are competitive. That should not surprise you. But if you don't apply, you definitely won't get a grant. It sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people resist applying because they feel that, well, I'm unlikely to get it. And a lot of studies have shown that this sort of thinking particularly affects women and people of color, various minority groups who are less likely to take risks. So I like to really encourage to say, just go ahead, as long as the Arizona State University backs you in applying, you should absolutely go ahead and really push for it. You want to read guidelines very carefully. We are a government agency, we are a bureaucracy, we can be sticklers. You know, if we say that a CV can only be 3 pages, it better be only 3 pages. If you submit a 3.5 page, your entire application will be ruled ineligible. So read the guidelines carefully. If you have questions, you should always reach out. Getting to my third point, always feel free to reach out to our program officers. They're there Monday to Friday, ready to answer any questions you might have. And make sure you have what I like to say is a 2-year plan. So what does that mean? It means, given the statistics of applying to a grant program, you are unlikely to be awarded the first time you apply. That's not true at NEH, that's true in general. So if you have a 2-year plan, then you will plan to be rejected that first year, and you will plan to get those reviews from panelists and from the NEH to find out what you could do better next time. And not surprisingly, when people reapply and they take panelists and NEH staff comments to heart and they make those changes, the statistics get a lot better. So if you have a 2-year plan, you're going to do a way better job than if you just have the one and done plan, as we like to say. That is, you apply, you get rejected, and you're like, oh, well, I didn't get it, and you give up. Okay. We are a federal agency supported from your taxpayer dollars. We've been around since the 60s, and the center of everything we do is peer review. Why does it matter that we're federal? Well, as I said, we work for you. You have a right to privacy. You have a right to transparency. So again, workshops like this, but also just if you have questions, you can always ask. And you have a right to know what happened to your application. So you will get, as long as you ask for them, you will get panelist comments and NEH staff comments for your application, whether you're awarded or not. And I should note that, of course, even if you get a grant, you should always ask for those reviews. We do change our panelists every year, so they will never know that you applied previously. So every time you apply, your application is treated fairly, equal to all other applications that come in. As I said, today, I want to go over briefly sort of the 7 divisions that have grant programs at the NEH, and give you a few examples of the types of grants that those divisions get. So if you're ready, I'm going to dive in. Oh, no, I'm not going to dive in. I'm going to tell you a little bit more. So what are the humanities? In case it's not clear, I've tried to put some general, ologies here, or try to avoid the ologies, I should say. We cover everything that you would consider to be humanities, but also, we do cover a lot of things that are fringing into the social sciences. Technically, our mandate is to cover the humanities and the humanistic social sciences. Nobody really knows what that means, but what I generally say is, there is overlap with the NSF. So if you're in fields like sociology, anthropology, linguistics, there may be some overlap with NSF. And if you ever have questions about that, you should feel free to reach out and we can talk to you about it. What I generally say is think about who would be the interested audience for your work, the kinds of research that you're doing, who will be most excited. Would it be historians, people in literature, languages, interest in culture, or is it going to be more closer to STEM and sort of social modeling and that kind of thing? And that's a very simplistic distinction, but sometimes it works. That's our founding charter, just letting you know that we cover these things. We have funded more than 68,000 projects now, over $6 billion awarded, including those 2 stimulus packages over the past few years with the pandemic. We're very proud of what we've done since 1965, and we're going to keep doing it as long as they let us. I went and looked at the stats. Arizona State's done actually pretty well. Shouldn't surprise you. You are a powerhouse for research. It turned out that for every 6 applications, one's been funded. So those are better than the average odds for the country. So you should be proud of that. And hopefully after today, it's going to go even higher. So we'll work on that. But that's great for ASU. All right, now I'll dive into the divisions. Sorry about that. All right, sounds great. Start with the most complicated. We have at the NEH 2 types of funding that we can give out. There is what we call outright funding. Outright funding is what you think of. You apply for a grant, you say, I need $100,000. You're awarded that grant, and so we give you $100,000 of taxpayer money. That's called outright funding. And almost all of our grant programs and divisions focus on outright funding. When we say that the endowment, the National Endowment for the Humanities was given $185 million from Congress, we're talking about outright funds. The other kind of funds that we have, and other federal agencies have this too, are what's called Treasury matching funds. Treasury matching funds are the roll-off interest on Treasury bonds that is then given back to government agencies to encourage public-private partnership. These are called federal matching grants or Treasury matching funds. It's got a bunch of names, but the idea of it is that if you can raise money from a third-party source, we can give you federal matching funds, either at a 1-to-1 match, sometimes it's 1-to-2, 1-to-3, it depends on the program. And it's a way that you can leverage federal money to raise third-party money out there. So through fundraising, through donors or private, public foundations like nonprofits, that kind of thing. Our Office of Challenge Grants specifically focus on these matching funds. So it's a way to leverage federal matching funds and third-party donors, foundations, that kind of thing, to do mostly large infrastructure projects, which is what Challenge Grants specializes in. So a lot of it is, sort of brick and mortar, museums or archives that need new shelving or a whole new HVAC system, or they're building a new wing and they're going to raise money. So like a challenge campaign kind of thing. They can come to the NEH, apply for one of these infrastructure and capacity building grants. And they'll say, okay, we'll put aside $500,000 of federal matching funds. And for every dollar that you raise, we'll give you $1 if that's a 1-to-1 match. Okay. In some cases, it's if you raise $2, you get $1. So that's a way that you can then say, okay, private donor, the federal government's offered me $500,000. Will you match that? Or will you give us $100,000 towards that? Because every $100,000 you give will turn into $200,000 automatically. And that's the basis of our challenge grants. We have a new program called Climate Smart Humanities Organizations. The idea is helping organizations, institutions to update and upgrade their facilities to be more eco-friendly, to combat climate change by putting in more energy efficient lighting or new HVAC systems, that kind of thing. And it's a 1-to-1 match up to $300,000. This is a brand new program that just launched, and the first call will be in January. And obviously, the Arizona State University Grants Office would be applying to this. And if you are working at an institution or organization or a building on campus that could use these funds, or you think has the ability to raise money against these funds, you should absolutely go talk to your grants office. Okay, digital humanities. A lot of people ask the question, so if I'm doing digital humanities, do I automatically apply to the Office of Digital Humanities? And the answer is no. Digital humanities actually span all of our divisions in different ways. Even challenge grants can be used to create digital infrastructure or like a digital humanities lab. So what the Office of Digital Humanities was founded was to push innovation in digital humanities. So methodological development, new innovative approaches to the use of digital technologies with humanities, whether it's research or preservation or education or whatever it is. So what ODH specializes in is grants that are meant to kind of stimulate the next new thing or the next new usage or the next new application of digital technologies in whatever part of the humanities you're in. And so here are some examples of the kinds of projects that ODH has supported in the past. If you ever have questions, and this is a very common question, I don't know whether I should apply to ODH, the Office of Digital Humanities, or should I be applying directly to research for the digital monographs, collaborative research. That's a totally normal question. You should always feel free to reach out. I usually recommend reach out first to ODH, to the Digital Humanities Office. They're fully staffed by digital humanists. and explain to them your project, and they can help point you in the right direction. They're usually the best place to go if you are wanting to apply for a digital humanities project, and they can tell you this would be better in research or this would be better in education. Digital Humanities Advancement Grants are the most common grants they give. They have different levels of funding. So if you kind of need seed money, you can go to level 1. But if you've got a well-established project and you want to scale it or expand it, you might go to level 3. And the next deadline again is January. There's a new program that's launched in ODH. The idea of this is to try to get the humanities more involved in some important discussions going on, particularly in STEM, science, technology, math, et cetera, medicine, in those fields. So this is a grant program to encourage humanists who are doing, whether it's collaborative research or some kind of convening or some kind of work where they want to look into technology in particular, and what are the threats and opportunities there, and how can humanists and humanistic thought engage with those. So a great example would be looking at ethics and genetics, or a big hot topic right now is surveillance. Social media and surveillance, and privacy, people's personal information, images, that kind of stuff, and how digital media, social media, surveillance media is crossing boundaries, cultural boundaries, social boundaries, legal boundaries. How do humanists play into those? We see a lot of that, not a lot, but I mean, we see projects in that quite frequently. If you're in that realm or interested, this might be the program for you. ODH is running it on behalf of the whole agency, so you should look into it. And the funding levels you'll see on the website depends on whether it's a single project director or a collaborative group applying. Okay, education. As I said, I'm moving real fast. Our education division, for the most part, focuses in higher education. There are a few opportunities to support teaching the teachers kind of model for K through 12 teachers, but most of our programs are for higher ed, generally undergraduate education, helping to improve humanities education, curricula, tools, teaching tools, and opportunities for experiential learning. A lot of different programs. I'm not going to go over all of them. They are on the website. I'm just going to go over a few just to give you a little idea. Humanities Initiatives is the most common. It's about developing new resources for teaching, to advance teaching in higher ed in the humanities. Very straightforward. A lot of our programs are either place-based or subject-based, and many of you probably know the summer seminars and institutes. This is like if you have a group of scholars at ASU who are all interested in Civil War history or Native American history, for example, and you think you could teach other higher ed teachers, essentially other professors who don't have access to the kinds of scholars you have at ASU or the facilities, perhaps it's a museum collection, something like that, and you think you could do a really intensive Teach the Teachers for higher ed teaching to help improve how do we teach Native American studies elsewhere in the country. You can apply to the NEH for a seminar institute, and then you would be having teachers, when I say teachers, professors, lecturers, people at higher ed, sometimes K through 12 as well, applying to you to say, I'd like to come to your summer seminar about Native American studies. And you would use those funds to help bring them and gather everyone for those sort of learning opportunities. It's a great program. You should definitely look into it. If you're interested not to host a seminar institute, but are interested in maybe opportunities to go to one, you can always go to our website for summer seminars and institutes and see the list of next summer's seminars and institutes. And you can go see what's available, and there'll be a link, and you can go to that link and apply to them directly for an opportunity to take part in those seminars and institutes. Landmarks is more place-based, so it's a similar concept, but it's like you have a historic site, you want to bring a group of teachers or a group of higher ed, lecturers and professors to that historic site in order to do more experiential learning on the ground. Humanities Connections is a way that we try to encourage educators, particularly in higher ed, to engage with STEM or social science or social science educators in their institution. So it's a way to kind of create interdisciplinary teaching opportunities and resources. So Humanities Connections, if you're interested in doing something like that, this would be a great opportunity to get some funding, to give you time to work together to figure out the curricula and the resources and what you need to do. Incitement, if you don't know about it, is a resource. It's full of all sorts of things useful for teaching. It is used frequently, interesting, in homeschooling. That seems to be our main audience, but even undergraduate teaching, there's some great resources. They're all free, and you can use them in your curricula and even just for yourself to brush up on what is the latest thinking on civil rights research, or what's the latest thinking on Melville. You know, you can find stuff on Incitements. You should definitely check it out since it's free. Okay, Fed-state partnership. You probably already know this, but there is, in every state and territory, there is a Humanities Council that is funded through the NEH, partially at least. So Arizona definitely has a wonderful Humanities Council. You should, if you've never explored them before, you should totally look them up. They do amazing things, and it's a great opportunity, particularly if you're interested in public humanities, more publicly engaged, community-based humanities. Those tend to be done by our Humanities Councils because they're on the ground. And so we give them an allocation of the taxpayer, outright funds that comes to the NEH, go automatically to each state. And the state then use them to run all sorts of programs. So I encourage you to check them out. They do sometimes also have grants for research or for teaching, speaking opportunities, or all sorts of things. So you should check them out and see if anything looks good. Preservation and access is what it sounds like. It's grants to support collections, the preservation of collections, curation, digitization. It can have a research component, but really the focus should be on how do we get these collections better preserved and give the public access to them, or scholars or students or whatever it may be. It can be all kinds of things, as you see here. Some of them are digital databases and digitization of old newspapers and pamphlets and this sort of thing. And sometimes it's artifacts and archives and that sort of stuff. So it can be all kinds of stuff, including real conservation work, like art conservation sometimes even can come through here. Obviously, there needs to be a real humanities focus. So if it's for example, an art collection, there needs to be an explanation of why that art is historically relevant, important to art studies, rather than just, we have art, we need to conserve it, right? Lots of different programs. I'm not going to go over all of them. The most common one is HCRR. That's the Humanities Collections and Reference Resources. That is often, by the way, if you want to do a digitization project, that is usually where that goes. So you should look into that. But you'll see there's also opportunities to, research and development is, getting more access to collections. Preservation access, education and training is what it sounds like. It's getting training for professionals who need help, new skill sets for their collections or for their, whatever kind of conservation and preservation they're doing. We do have a program for sustaining cultural heritage collections. So again, if you're working with a collection, if you work in a museum, library, archive, this might be somewhere to look for if you have stuff that's kind of corroding away or needs some help to keep it going for the next generation and those that come after. This could be a good grant program for you. And there's a brand new program that's meant to help resiliency post-pandemic in particular, but also those affected by climate change. So this can be a little more community-based. It obviously still needs to have a humanities focus, not a humanitarian focus. Let's not confuse those. But it is a special new program just developed to respond to, in particular, the pandemic, but also some of the problems that have been caused by climate change, including, hurricanes, flooding, droughts, and what effect that's having on cultural heritage and cultural preservation. Public programs, again, it's what it sounds like. We're not very innovative in our names, but the idea of public programming is more like public education. So whereas the Division of Education is very focused on higher ed and a little bit on K through 12, although most K through 12 goes to the Department of Ed, which we don't try not to step on their toes, but we're mostly focused in higher ed humanities education. In public programs, it's literally continuing education for the public. And that can take many forms: film, radio, podcasts, video games, all kinds of stuff. Media project is the sort of flagship. Generally speaking, that's usually, documentary film, but it can also, as I said, be podcasts, radio programs, all kinds of things. That you can get a smaller grant for kind of a startup. And then once you have a more established, you need to do the full production, you can get up to $650,000. 2 deadlines a year if you're working in that. Happy to answer more questions or get you in touch. Public humanities projects tend to be more exhibit-based. Sometimes it's site-based. So placards for a historic site, for example, could be an example of a PHP. And again, they have planning and production phases of the grant. Digital projects is, educational video games, essentially, or websites where the idea is to educate a public, some audience out there on a humanities-based topic. All of these public programs, they'll want to see that involved in the project are humanists. So particularly a humanities scholar if necessary. So for example, when Ken Burns applies for his documentary projects, many of which we have funded, he will always have historians as co-PIs on the grant. He'll have historians or as advisors on those projects because Ken Burns doesn't claim to be a historian, right? He's a documentarian. So he needs to have historians working with him. So similarly, if you're developing a mobile app for some kind of educational purpose, and it's on literature. So as people read books, they have this app to give them context. I'm making stuff up. We'd want to see that you have real literary scholars, particularly in the types of literature that you're going to target, working on that project. So you need to have the technical know-how on the project, but you also need to have the humanities content know-how or expertise. All right, most important division, because it's mine, the Division of Research Programs, may be the one you're most familiar with. Obviously, we support research mostly in higher education, but also we do support independent scholars. And I'll get to that for those of you who might be contingent or, might be going elsewhere. We sometimes get PhD students who are just finishing and they're like, do you have any opportunities for me? And the answer is yes. All right, so we have an unusual ability in the federal government in that we have a special line that allows us to give grants directly to individuals. And of course, those are our fellowships. What that means is that in all of the other grant programs I've listed up to this point that I've discussed, in all the other divisions, you, the individual, are not applying to the NEH. Your institution is applying to the NEH. That is, Arizona State, most likely, is applying to the NEH. They are choosing you to be the project director. But at the end of the day, the grant is owned by the institution, not by the individual. Meaning if you leave Arizona State, there is no guarantee you take that grant with you, right? The organization may hold on to the grant and pick somebody else to be the project director, whether you like it or not. This is something that's very important, particularly for scholars to understand, because they often, there have been lawsuits, not with us, but with their institutions when they leave and the institution holds the grant and doesn't release it. And the scholar says it's my intellectual property. Legally, that may be true, but the grant is owned by the institution. The exception are these grants for individuals. And that is because this is an opportunity for independent writers, recent PhDs who are in that contingency loop, the contract work. Oftentimes institutions won't allow them to apply, and it's not because they don't like them or whatever, but oftentimes it can be a liability issue. If you're contingent faculty or contract faculty, you may not be eligible to apply for big institutional grants through ASU. However, you are eligible for these fellowships. And once you receive a fellowship, your institution can agree to host it for you. So it's still your grant. It's not your institution's grant. But if your institution is willing to do all the paperwork essentially for you, it's going to save you a lot of heartache in terms of tax forms and bureaucratic forms that they're going to manage the grant for you. But if you leave that institution, you take that grant with you because it is your grant, not your institution's. I hope that's clear. If you have questions about that, if that's an important question, I'm happy to answer more about it. Okay, so research has two kinds of offerings. We have these grants for individuals, many different programs. We also have grants for institutions. So I'll try to cover some of these. If you have questions about any of the programs I have not talked about today, put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. All right, our fellowship program probably needs no introduction for you. Can give up to 12 months of support. There's no budget attached. It's a 3-page narrative, a 1-page work plan or timeline, a 2-page CV, a 1-page bibliography. What am I missing? It's very short, is my point. It's a very easy application in the length, unlike some of these institutional grants, which can be 20 pages of narrative and multiple CVs and all, you know, it's this sort of big production, and you get a PDF that's 120 pages long. These are short, but they are short, which means they need to be succinct, and you got to get a lot of information about your project and who you are into 3 pages. And that's, as you'll see this afternoon with the mock panel, is often where applications go awry. But we don't have budgets attached to these. You just say, I need 8 months to do this kind of archival research and this kind of writing. And if you're awarded, it's 8 times $5,000 a month. So you get 40,000 done. And that's how our fellowships work. We also have digital fellowships for digital publication. These are really for born digital monographs. If you have questions about that, happy to answer it. But it's not about taking your work and digitizing it. It's about, you want to create a multimedia experience rather than a published print book. This is very common, as you can imagine, in things like film studies, but we've had it in all different disciplines. It can be really be wonderful in things like archaeology. It's sort of creating these digital worlds where somebody walks through an excavation or walks through a site, recreated digitally. We've had in literature studies, history of lit in particular, you know, the website looks like an image of a library, you know, a shelving, books on a shelf, and you can actually click on the books, and that's how you dive deeper into the research into these books and that kind of thing, and it sort of recreated a historic library and then got into the books that influenced the scholar. So that's the kind of thing we do with this program. Summer stipend. Our summer stipends program is small but mighty. The idea is to help faculty who you know, might instead have to teach in the summer, to try to give them some funds for 2 months so they can do research instead. You do require a nomination from your institution. So ASU every year nominates 2 scholars to apply. The exception to this is contingent faculty. Obviously, they don't have to if you're on contingent, like, you know, you're, what is that, adjuncting. If you're an adjunct, you don't have to be nominated. You can apply as an independent for the opportunity. But anyway, ASU, I don't know how it works at ASU, but you can check with the grants office and find out, or if you really can't figure out who runs the nomination, let me know and I can look it up on my end and let you know. But actually Nicole or Jacob may know. But anyway, you would apply internally at ASU for the nomination, and then ASU says, yes, we're going to nominate these 2. The application looks very similar to a fellowship in terms of length and construct. You're just asking for 2 months of full-time research, whether it's research or writing. Summer stipends do really well for early stage research. So it's like, I need to get to this archive, you know, and you know, I've been working on a book, but I need to get to this archive. Can I get $6,000 to go to this archive? Or they're really good at the very end stage where it's like, I've written most of the book. I just need 2 months to finish cleaning up some passages, and get the manuscript submitted to a publisher. You can apply for a summer stipend for the middle of your project, but imagine, you know, reviewers are looking at this and you're like, you know, I've done the research, but I want to write 8 chapters. So if I can get the summer stipend, I'll probably be able to get 2 chapters done. It's fine. It just doesn't seem, you know, that it's, you know, $6,000 is just like, you know, a drop of water in a bucket. Versus if it's early stage or late stage, that's often where stipends are most competitive, I would say. Fellowships is the reverse, right? So fellowships do best when it's 6 to 12 months of support, when it's that you've already done preliminary work. So your application is stronger because you have a better sense of what you're doing and what the final product will look like, but you still have plenty of work to do. So you need almost half a year to a full year in order to do that. So fellowships tend to do better in that middle stage. Rather than the beginning or the end. And again, happy to answer questions about that. Public scholars is just like fellowships, except the audience is quite different. So the idea is that you want to write a book for the public. We only created this program, I don't know, 7 years ago now. It spun out of fellowships because we found that a lot of books that were intended to be written for the public were not faring well in fellowships, which generally were reviewed by academics who were saying this is not an academic monograph. So this program encourages things like biographies, synthetic works. It does not allow creative nonfiction, so it has to be well researched. It does not need footnotes, but the book will need to use research or synthesize research in the humanities to get to the public or some publics out there. Unlike fellowships, which is reviewed by scholars like you, public scholars is reviewed by a mix of, it has a panel of 4. 2 of them are going to be academics who also do public writing or public engagement. And the other 2 are going to come from the world of publishing, editing, or independent writers. And we get some real amazing names who review for us, Pulitzer Prize winners and National Book Award winners, who are just incredible and give up their time to just do this as a service. And it's wonderful. And we get their feedback on your applications. So if you do want to write for the public, this might be an opportunity to look into. Collaborative research. Now I'm in the institutional grants. That means ASU would be applying, hopefully with you as a project director. There's 4 types of collaborative research grants. The smallest are international planning grants. If you want to start essentially a new project or advance a project that involves international collaborators, including Canada and Mexico, of course, this is an opportunity to get $25,000 to allow you to go back and forth as needed, either bring them here or you go there. You will, in this post-pandemic world, need to justify why this has to be done in person and not virtually. You know, what are the benefits of doing it in person, and therefore why you need to spend the money to do it. We also have convening grants. Convening is a little more established. It's, you know, often it's, we want to assemble a group of scholars to give papers on X topic, and then we're going to do a co-edited volume of the results, or a special journal edition or something like that. But it's that kind of thing. It's not a conference as in, you know, a membership-based conference. It's a more focused, smaller group, and you can get up to $50,000 for that. We have our publication grants, our manuscript preparation grants, what it sounds like. It's just like a fellowship, but for a group of scholars working together on a co-authored or co-edited book. It can involve research and writing and convening, all kind of part and parcel. And the offshoot of that are the scholarly digital projects, which are just the same idea. It's a group of scholars working together on a digital monograph or a digital experience. It can also be an annotated database, but it has to have clear research questions and research outputs. The idea being that whatever you're producing is going to stimulate more research in the humanities. We have a special sub-award starting this year that if you are going to collaborate with an HBCU, a tribal college, or a community college, you can ask for an additional $50,000 of support. The idea behind this is many of these types of institutions don't have the infrastructure to apply for big government grants. So ASU would apply for the grant with a sub-award to those institutions. And it's an incentive for you to engage with them and help them to get into the world of federal granting and these big collaborative projects. Scholarly editions and translations is kind of like collaborative research, but it's very focused on mostly things like papers projects. You know, we fund almost all of the presidential papers projects, Martin Luther King, Mark Twain. It can be long-term, multi-decadal projects, or it can be a one-off. You know, it can be, I've got the papers and works of X person in my possession, or I've been given access to them, and I want to write, you know, an annotated volume, or it can also be digital. So it's going to be an annotated database of all of their digitized letters and notes and whatever, and I'm going to annotate it with an introduction and explain why this person is important. And that kind of thing is scholarly editions and translations. It can also be translations. So it cannot just be, I have documents and I want to translate them to English. It has to explain how you're going to annotate them with research. right? So it's not pure translation, it's scholarly translation. It's a distinction. If you have questions, happy to answer them. Just to give you an idea, here are some funding rates from last year. Fellowships, as you can imagine, very competitive. We're down at about 6%. Our research funding has not increased in 20 years. So if you know any congressmen, please push them. We definitely need more funding. Summer stipends, we've been increasing the rate as there's been greater need. So we're funding, in this case, 14% of our summer stipends. Collaborative research, these bigger grants are more like 11%. In other divisions, the bigger grant, the bigger institutional grants I was mentioning, they tend to have success rates around 15%. So for research, our rates are low because, as I said, they kind of flatlined our funding for many years. Some of the other divisions have grown over the years, education, public programming, preservation and access. So their success rates are a little higher, but at least in research, that's what you're looking at. We're always available, obviously in work hours, East Coast, 9 to 5, by telephone, certainly by email. All programs, by the way, have their own email address. That's usually the best way to go in. Don't try to necessarily go straight to the program officer. Email the program, and somebody affiliated with the program will get back to you as soon as possible. Programs do have some programs do have draft reading as an option. We are limited in how much we can respond. If you were to email me out of the blue and say, hey, I'm thinking of applying, and here's what I've written so far, could you take a look? I'm not allowed by law to look at that because I'd be unfairly advancing you and not anyone else applying. So fairness is the key for the government, right? But we do have draft deadlines, and that's a way to be fair. As long as you get your draft in by the deadline, it opens the door for us to speak with you more in depth about your application, how you're proposing the project, and any other pitfalls. I always tell people, even if you don't have a fully fleshed out draft application, put something in. Put in like a 2-page summary and a budget. Obviously follow the directions. Some programs allow you to submit a budget, some don't. But anyway, for the draft deadline, always submit something, because what it does is it opens the door for us. We're very hidebound in what we can tell you unless you apply with a draft. So always submit something, because as I say, it opens the door for us to talk to you more honestly, give you a bit more feedback than if you just email or call me out of the blue. I can talk to you about the program. I can listen to what you want to do and say, yes, that sounds like the kind of project that would fit here, but I can't really give you solid advice on, oh, you might want to do X, Y, and Z, okay? Because we're restricted, as I said, because of fairness. We do have sample applications on our website. This afternoon, you'll see some sample applications from fellowships. We hold webinars like this, but also each program will have its own webinar. It will be listed on the website for that program when the webinar is. We also record those webinars and post them. So even if you miss the webinar, you can look at the last one posted, which would be helpful. We do have a blog with some funded projects. There's also a public query tool if you just want to see what kinds of grants have been published in the past. If you Google NEH query, public query, Q-U-E-R-Y, you should be able to find it. And it's a website that, again, you can just put in keywords. You can look up by division, what kind of things have collaborative research funded over the past 5 years. You do that kind of searching of our database. And we do, as I say, provide reviewer comments. You have to ask for them. But if you are rejected or given the grant, you should always ask for reviewer comments. So that's the spiel. So I'll leave this up maybe, and let's go to the Q&A. Why don't I just go from the top? Okay. Tracy Perkins asked, do you have the matching funds committed already before applying to the challenge grants? That's a great question. No, you do not need to have those third-party funds in hand. That is true. By the way, many of our other programs also have a matching opportunity. That is, for example, in scholarly editions, you can ask for $300,000 of those outright funds, and you can ask for $150,000 of matching funds. You're not required to, but you're allowed to. In this case, what you're doing is you're making you're throwing out a bold claim. You're saying, okay, challenge grants or whatever program with matching, we think we can raise $300,000. If you will give us you know, if we, and this is how we're going to raise it, right? You have to be, you can't just say we will raise it. You have to say we have a history of raising money. This is how we raise money. Here's how we plan to raise money. Those sorts of things. You make it clear, and then if awarded, as I said, for every 50 cents you bring in, you'll get 50 cents. And if you don't make the match, no harm, no foul, right? So it's a challenge. That's the whole idea. And the same with other programs that allow matching. How many challenge grant recipients are able to fundraise successfully to use all the challenge grant funds committed? I don't know the stats on that. Obviously, it's been a challenge the past few years with COVID. You know, fundraising has been really hard. Many foundations were hit hard financially. It's a bit of a mess. So I wouldn't take the current numbers as an indicator, but I mean, the challenge grants program has been going on for a while, and I know it's been successful in many ways, so I can't get you the numbers on that. If you're interested, I would go to their website, email them directly and ask, and they should be able to get you something. Can we get a link to the summer institutes available to faculty to attend? Yes. If you Google NEH summer seminars and institutes, there should be a link on the website there. If somebody has the ability to post that in the chat, I would appreciate it. I'm not sure if I do. But otherwise, I can get it to Jacob and he can share it later. But there's a web page that lists all the upcoming institutes and seminars that you'd be available to apply to. Does preservation and access also fund collecting, or is it just preservation and access of collections already in place? Great question, and the answer is no. My understanding is we are not allowed to fund collecting. There are exceptions to that, but generally speaking, federal money should not be used to buy collections. If you have a question about that, I would definitely reach out to preservation and access, and they can explain that better. Jacob, question for you. Will we get a recording of this after the talk? And I'll take a drink while you answer that.
I can answer that. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Nicole. Easy answer. Okay. Can the individual fellowships be used to buy out teaching in place of or in addition to funding research expenses? Another great question. The answer is no, unfortunately. Because the grant goes directly to you, the individual, it doesn't go to the institution. That would be between you and your institution to figure out how that works. So in some cases, it's a sabbatical. That's the most common, where you just take a sabbatical year or semester, and the fellowships must be full-time. So you're not allowed to do, oh, I'll drop down to only teaching 2 courses and half-time I'll be doing research. They have to be full-time research. So again, it's between you and ASU, if that's your institution. Again, if you're an individual scholar or adjunct, you have a little bit more flexibility, but we expect you to be working 100% on the research while you're on an NEH fellowship. How it works with your institution is unfortunately between you and your institution, and we don't step in. If you don't typically teach during the summer, are you still competitive for summer stipends? Another great question. Thank you, Tracy. Yes, you are. And the reason for that is one of the mantras of the NEH is need is not a criterion. That is, we have on our website for each program the criteria that panelists must use in order to evaluate applications. Never, in no program, never, is there need. That is, and that can go both ways. Your recent postdoc, adjuncting, miserable, everybody feels bad for you. Do you get a bump up in fellowships? No. On the other hand, your senior faculty, big name professor, you've got Guggenheims coming out of every you-know-what. Does that hurt your chances? And the answer is no. And if we see panelists trying to sway their scores or sway other panelists with need-based criteria, we tell them need is not a criterion. And we can have a great philosophical and ethical discussion about that if you're interested, but maybe not right now. This is also the case with, we don't collect demographic information about our applicants. So demographic info should never be used in discussion. So if somebody says, oh, well, this is a young woman of color, that's not a criterion. And we shouldn't know that information because we don't ask for it, right? So this is very government, right? It's like we pretend to be blind about these things. Anyway, but it's a great question. So yes, you'd still be competitive even if you don't typically teach. Can I clarify the distinction between collaborative and convening grants? Okay. Collaborative research is the program. And the idea is that it's a program in which there's more than one scholar working together. Within that umbrella, there's the 4 types. One of those types are convening grants. And convening grants are to assemble a group of scholars together in order to do research of some kind. It's usually done in terms of presentations. So it's usually a group of scholars getting together to talk about X, and here are here's the topic, here are the speakers. They've already agreed that they will, if funded, they will come and do this, and kind of a workshop seminar kind of format. It doesn't have to be formal presentations leading to a book. It could also be a convening where a group of scholars are going to come together to kind of brainstorm together, to look through archives and collections together and do research together in a convening format. That's generally how it works. So the distinction is just that collaborative research is the overarching umbrella. International planning, convening, scholarly digital projects, and manuscript preparation are the 4 types under that umbrella. How does trending research play into the grants that are funded? For example, dangers and opportunities of technology is supporting trendy work in surveillance studies. Another great question. Well, I should say dangers and opportunities of technology is brand new, so they haven't been funding anything yet. I was saying in other programs, sorry, in some of our existing programs, we've been seeing more and more surveillance studies. It's apparently a hot topic. How does that play into it? That's a great question. Technically, it is not a criterion, right? So technically the timeliness or the trendiness or the hotness of a topic is not something we ask. However, if one of the criterion is always broad significance in the humanities. So the project you're doing, does it have broad significance? And if something is a hot topic that a lot of humanists are talking about and thinking about and writing about, then the significance is going to be perhaps more obvious or more pressing than sometimes the more traditional projects. That said, we love our traditional projects, right? We're still funding, believe it or not, biographies of Ben Franklin. We just funded another one just a few months ago. So it still happens, right? You know, and it's because the scholar makes an argument and says, I've got a new angle on an old topic, and that's fine. So trendiness can be a little bump up, but I wouldn't say it has a measurable effect on your ability to get funded. What is the difference between humanitarian and humanities? Okay, so we get this question a lot. Your research, this question is specifically about research programs. Your research should be about scholarship. It should be about intellectual curiosity. I often say, what are your research questions? Who will care about your research questions? And if you answer your questions and you produce whatever product you're planning, whether it's articles or books or database or websites, who's going to use it and how will this stimulate new research? Those are the sorts of things that I always ask myself when I'm reading applications. It's like, is this going to stimulate new research? Or is this kind of a dead end? Or is this like a well-trodden path that's just like more of the same, right? And that is what we're looking for in humanities research. Humanitarian, I kind of made the joke, but sometimes people apply to us for more what I'd say is community-based public humanities, public literacy programs, you know, in Native American groups, things like language and culture revitalization efforts. And while, you know, we're huge fans of that work, that generally is funded through our state humanities councils, if at all. We generally don't fund that from the federal level. Social activism, social justice, of course, is a huge growing trend in the academy, in higher ed, and we do not allow advocacy, and activism is not allowed by our founding charter. So if a project shifts from being research or some kind of humanities-based work that maybe is involved in activism, that's fine, in the sense that, I mean, we even have studies of activists, and that's fine. But if the project is trying intentionally to use federal funding in order to push an agenda, whether it's political or ideological. That is actually not allowed, and can rule your application ineligible. And oftentimes that's more on the humanitarian bent. So we get a lot of applications, particularly from places like Arizona, for work with undocumented immigrant communities or border studies, hot topics like that. And we fund a lot of them, and many of them are amazing and important and will have a huge public impact. That could even have a humanitarian impact. But the goal as projected to us, and the budget and the timeline as given to us and to reviewers, is not for activism or advocacy. It is for research, it is for education, it's for public programming, public education about the topic, rather than action to fix a problem, if that makes sense. So that's what I was saying about the difference there. What if I'm a visiting scholar? I'm not full-time, just visiting. Can I apply for an NEH public scholar? Yes, public scholar, you can apply as an individual. So you do not, just like all of our fellowship programs, other than summer stipends, well, no, that's not true, even summer stipends, you can apply as an independent. So you can always apply as an independent scholar. So you don't need your institution for public scholars or for any of our fellowships. I should note, if you are visiting from a foreign country, so all of our grants are open to US citizens. They're also open to US residents who have been in the country for 3 years or more. So if you're applying particularly for fellowships and you are actually a visiting scholar from Canada here on a 2-year fellowship, you're not eligible, unfortunately, for our funds. But US citizens are, even if they are teaching abroad. So a US citizen teaching at University of Toronto is eligible. Can the individual fellowships be used for salary instead of or in addition to research costs? Yes, actually. So the fellowship funding, so that $5,000 a month, we don't ask how you will use the actual dollars. They are dollars to you. They are essentially salary. We say we're buying your time. So we're giving you $5,000 per month that you're going to be working 100% on this research and writing. What you do with that money is up to you. We don't ask for a budget at the end. We don't need to see how every dollar is spent. It's essentially what we call an award. It's not really a grant, it's an award. So it is awarded to you $40,000 for 8 months of research or writing or both. And yes, you can use it for salary. You can use it to travel, you can use it for salary, childcare, whatever it is you do with your money in your life is completely up to you. Are there any grants between the NEH and the NEA that bridge work between humanities and the arts? Funny you should ask that. There is currently a new initiative just being launched, which is called something like Combating Hate. Don't quote me on the title. It's literally just launching now. I know hate is in the title. But it is the first collaborative program initiative between the NEH and the NEA that I've seen. I've only been here 4 years or so, but generally we don't have collaborative programs between us. But this new initiative, Combating Hate or whatever it's called, may have some programs that launch out of it that will be collaborative. I haven't seen them yet, so stay tuned. Where can we sign up to receive updates on what is being funded in the various NEH divisions? Can you provide a URL? There is, yes, so we have 3 grant meetings a year. March, July, and November are our grant councils, and the announcements come the following month. So April, August, and December, the new grants are announced. There's always a press release. I don't know how to get onto their email, but if you go to the NEH website, you should be able to find the press releases, and there must be a way to sign up to get on the list. Usually New York Times will cover it, which is always nice for us. The website, we have a Twitter account. I mean, for now, we have a Twitter account, so you can also go there, and there will always be the announcements coming out of NEH posted there. I think there's also Facebook and various other platforms, so you can find a lot of that posted through social media, which is another way to follow that. Okay, I think something just came in the chat. Okay, let's see. Is it possible to apply for more than one grant as long as they're from different programs and the periods in which the grants would be held don't overlap? For example, applying for both a Summer Institute grant and an individual research fellowship. So great question, complicated question. Yes, you are eligible to apply for more than one grant. However, so there's two things to keep in mind. If you are the project director or official personnel on a grant like a Summer Institute, some percentage of your time in the application is devoted to that Summer Institute. So let's say it's 20% of your annual time will be devoted to that seminar and institute. If you then apply for a fellowship, which requires 100% of your time, if the period of performance, so if the timeline overlaps, that's a problem because you've now promised 120% of your time to the federal government. If the timelines don't overlap, and of course, yes, we check that, then it's no problem. You know, it would be, you'd be on one federal grant up until August of 2024, and then your fellowship would pick up September 2024 for the next however long. That's no problem. So that's one thing to consider. If you're applying for two different programs for essentially the same project, so let's say you have a digitization project of a bunch of personal papers from a famous author, and you don't know whether to apply to the HCRR program, Humanities Collections and Reference Resources in Preservation and Access, or should you apply to research, to scholarly editions and translations, and you think, you know what, I'll just put in for both. That actually currently can be a problem. Federal regulation right now doesn't allow applicants to put in two applications in two different programs for the same project unless the costs in the budgets are complementary. So let's say one grant asks for money for the digital expert who's doing the digitization and the website design. And this one is going to pay for the professor who's doing the research and the academic intellectual content on those. That would be allowable because those are two different costs and they're complementary. What would not be allowed is if the digital expert and the professor are listed on both projects, as in their part of their salaries on both projects. That would be seen as overlapping. And that can rule one of your applications ineligible. It's very complicated. Your grants office can probably advise you better, but generally speaking, if there's no overlap in time, or if they're two entirely different projects, you can apply for both. Oh, I should also note, if you've got two totally different projects, but they have overlapping time, and you're putting in for both because you're like, well, I hope to get one of them, and that's what I'll do in that time, that should be okay. Should be okay. I don't rule things ineligible. That's done by a separate office that follows the federal regulation. If you have questions about that, you should always reach out ahead of time before you waste the time to put in an application. Then it's just going to get ruled ineligible. But yes, theoretically, it's possible. All right, I think more came in. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Tracy, for sharing the email news updates link. That's great. Much appreciated. Are review panels the same for individual institution grants? Great question. Yeah, yes. So every program, generally speaking, has the same sort of review panels. They're generally anywhere from 3 to 5 individuals, panelists, peer reviewers. Obviously, in research, they tend to be academics. They tend to be PhDs, with a few exceptions, like public scholars. In things like public programming, it's going to be a mix of academics and practitioners, documentary filmmakers and podcast experts and that kind of stuff, more technical experts. But generally speaking, they're the same. Certain programs have more complex review than others. For example, our fellowships program, because we receive over 1,000 applications every year, instead of running 50 panels, we do a triage system. So we do external review first. We send batches them out, 20 applications out to 3 scholars. Every 20 applications gets the same 3 scholars. They come back with their scores and comments. We then take a third of those to go to the next round, which is another 4 sitting down, talking, like you'll see this afternoon, a seated, what we call a seated panel. So if you apply for fellowships and you get rejected and you only get 2 or 3 reviews, that means you only went out to that first stage of review and you didn't make the second cut. As they usually just take the top third from that panel to go on. If you get more like 5, 6, 7 reviews, that means you went to that second stage of review, which is why you have so many more. So that's a rare exception, but generally speaking, the panels are very similar in the way they look in terms of numbers of people and how they're run. Obviously, the questions asked and the criteria are always different, as you'd expect. I think there's something else in the chat. Oh, Jacob, thanks. Yeah, you put that. Great, great. Any other questions? I think we have a few more minutes. How do grant review panels get formed? That's a great question. Well, we'll go over it a little bit this afternoon, but when applications come in, we, the staff, try to kind of shuffle them together into panels. It's an art more than a science. We rely on applicants to self-define. We essentially ask them what discipline their project is involved in. And so if they say their project is anthropology or literature, they're more likely to get grouped with other projects that list themselves as anthropology or literature. So first we do the groupings, we try to make sure they're even, we try to make sure they're not too lumpy bag, as some people call it, where it's like a little bit of history of science and a little bit of sociology, and here's some, you know, American studies, and here's some literature. Those are very hard panels to review because you're all over the place, right? And they all have different jargons and different ideas. So we try to keep them as best we can sort of internally consistent. And then we find panelists who are willing to review in that set. So we'll have a, you know, US history panel. And we'll find 4 or 5 US historians who work on different issues, different time periods. You know, one might be in gender studies, whereas the other is a labor historian, you know, that kind of thing. And so all of our panels are generalist panels. They're not specialist panels, right? With a few exceptions. Obviously, our Documenting Endangered Languages program, we need linguists and linguistic anthropologists to review those. So those tend to be a little bit more specialized, but generally speaking, our panels are fairly broad in general, and that's how they get formed. People also can volunteer to be panelists. So if you're ever interested, just reach out and I'll get you connected. You can even say, I'd love to review for education grants or preservation access. By the way, it's a great way to learn how to apply for the program you might want to apply to in the future. So I always recommend offer to review. You're not going to get paid well. Sorry, it's definitely a service, but you know, it's a civil service, so good on you. And it's a great way to learn about the review process, to see how it all works, to get to know the program officers a little better. And people have always said, I've never heard negative comments from people about their experience on an NEH panel. Generally speaking, I'd say people enjoy the experience. So any other questions right now? Going once, going twice. Okay, Nicole or Jacob, any other questions you want me to answer right now, or should we stop for lunch?
I think we should stop for lunch, but if you want to stop sharing your screen and then I can come on, that's okay.
Oh, how do I abort, stop share, here we go.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful talk and a really fabulous overview. I'm looking forward to the second part of this event, which is going to happen after lunch. So everybody, if we would like to take a break now and we reconvene at 1 o'clock. That's correct, isn't it? So 1 o'clock, and it will go till 3:30. So if there's no other questions and we can just leave it there. So we'll see Chris again with Mike Chula, Catherine O'Donnell, Will Hedberg and Ron Brolio after lunch. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.